It all began on a seemingly normal evening when Representative Adam Schiff, known for his bold, sometimes confrontational rhetoric, decided to engage his growing online following. With his Capitol Hill office in the background, the California Democrat fired up an Instagram livestream, his voice confident, his words charged with purpose. His topic was the need for drastic environmental reform, and he passionately argued that the future of the planet was at risk. But what started as a discussion on clean energy and policy reforms quickly morphed into an unexpected political showdown. As Schiff leaned into the camera, his face serious, he responded to a viewer's question about Senate gridlock and the inability to push through critical environmental bills. His tone shifted abruptly, growing accusatory. "Senator John Kennedy is blocking progress," Schiff declared, his voice rising with frustration. "Why? Because he's in bed with the oil industry. His pockets are lined with corporate cash, and he's more interested in protecting big oil than protecting the future of our children. It's corruption, pure and simple." Schiff paused, letting the words sink in. "This man, Senator Oil as I like to call him, is standing in the way of the change we need." The chat exploded. Thousands of comments flooded the screen, some cheering, others demanding more details, while others began to question Schiff's claims. But the damage had been done. Schiff's words weren't just incendiary, they were personal, and they targeted Kennedy's reputation, his career, and his integrity. In Louisiana, Senator Kennedy watched it all unfold from his Baton Rouge office. He had built his career on being a man of principle, someone who stood up for his constituents and his beliefs. But this wasn't just another political attack. It was an all-out assault on his character. His calm demeanor hid the fury that began to rise within him. He was no stranger to political mudslinging, but this was different. This wasn't a typical partisan attack. It was an accusation that, if left unchecked, could damage everything he had worked for. By the next morning, Kennedy's legal team was already at work, preparing to file a defamation lawsuit that would send shockwaves through Washington. $80 million would be the price tag for Schiff's recklessness, and Kennedy wasn't going to back down. The stage was set for a battle that would shake the very foundations of political discourse in America. As the news of Representative Adam Schiff's live-streamed accusation spread like wildfire, the political world was thrown into chaos. Headlines across the country blared with variations of the same explosive claim. Senator Kennedy accused of corruption by Adam Schiff. For those on Kennedy's side, this was more than just a personal attack. It was a direct assault on the integrity of the political system itself. For Schiff's supporters, it was a rallying cry, an indictment of corporate greed and a call to arms against entrenched political figures who, in their view, had sold out to the highest bidder. Kennedy, however, remained resolute. As he sat in his office, his legal team already working overtime, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages of support from his colleagues and constituents, but the words of Schiff haunted him. Senator Oil, Schiff had called him, and those words felt like a shadow looming over everything he had built over the years. The media had picked up on the insult, amplifying it across social media platforms, where Kennedy was now trending alongside the words corruption and oil money. His legal team, a group of sharp-minded attorneys who had helped him navigate countless political battles, began to draft the lawsuit. Kennedy's instructions were clear. "We are not just fighting for my reputation, we are fighting for the truth." The defamation suit would seek $80 million in damages, not just for the harm to Kennedy's image, but for the broader implications of falsehoods being spread to millions of Americans. It wasn't enough to simply ignore the accusations. Kennedy knew this fight would be a pivotal moment in his political career. The lawsuit, meticulously crafted, outlined the accusations as malicious, false, and reckless. The complaint laid out the case that Schiff had defamed Kennedy by labeling him a corporate puppet without any credible evidence to back up such claims. The legal team attached a crucial piece of evidence, an email from Schiff's campaign manager that surfaced hours before the lawsuit was filed. The email allegedly leaked from inside Schiff's camp, contained an alarming statement. "We need to find something, anything that can tie Kennedy to the oil industry. Whether it's true or not, we have to make it stick." This would become the cornerstone of Kennedy's case. Kennedy's team wasted no time. By morning, the lawsuit was filed in federal court, sending shockwaves through Washington. The press conference that followed was a study in composure. Kennedy stood, tall at the podium, his face calm but his words sharp. "I've spent my career standing up for the people of Louisiana, and now I'm standing up for myself, for my family, and for the truth. This is not just about me. It's about ensuring that no one, especially not a member of Congress, can destroy another's reputation without consequence." While Kennedy took the high road, Schiff, already in damage control mode, responded publicly, dismissing the lawsuit as a partisan attack. He accused Kennedy of trying to silence him for speaking truth to power. In a hastily arranged press conference, Schiff stood behind the podium, his face tight with defiance. "This lawsuit is a distraction from the real issue at hand," he said. "It's an attempt to silence those of us who are calling out the corruption and greed that has poisoned our political system. I won't back down." His supporters, rallying behind his bold words, flooded social media with messages of support, some declaring that Schiff's outspokenness was exactly what the country needed in the face of powerful corporate interests. Despite Schiff's public bravado, cracks began to show. Legal analysts questioned whether Schiff had any concrete proof to support his accusations. In the weeks that followed, media outlets began scrutinizing the evidence, or lack thereof, that Schiff had based his accusations on. Legal experts noted that defamation cases involving public figures were notoriously difficult to win, but they also pointed out that the leaked email could provide Kennedy's team with the ammunition they needed to prove actual malice. The media frenzy intensified as new developments continued to unfold. Cable news programs devoted hours of coverage to the case, interviewing legal experts, former colleagues, and political analysts. As the case gained momentum, both Kennedy and Schiff found themselves fighting on two fronts, in the court of law and in the court of public opinion. In Louisiana, Kennedy hit the campaign trail, speaking at town halls and engaging with his supporters. His message was consistent and simple. The truth matters, and the truth will prevail. With each appearance, his approval ratings soared, particularly among the conservative base that had long trusted him. Kennedy's legal team continued to work behind the scenes, gathering more evidence, reviewing Schiff's public statements, and preparing for what was sure to be a prolonged legal battle. Schiff, on the other hand, was beginning to feel the pressure. While his live-streamed comments had initially garnered a surge of public support, cracks in his narrative were beginning to show. Reports began to surface that some members of his own staff had warned him against making such accusations without more substantial evidence. The more Schiff and his team tried to defend their actions, the more the public became divided. This was no longer just about the oil industry or corporate corruption. The real issue at stake was the integrity of the political system and the consequences of making false accusations in the age of social media. Would the power of a politician's words go unchecked? Or would the truth ultimately triumph over the noise of public discourse? For Senator Kennedy, the battle was just beginning. As the days passed, the defamation lawsuit between Senator Kennedy and Representative Schiff continued to dominate headlines across the country. The story was no longer just about politics, it was about truth, accountability, and the battle for integrity in the digital age. Both men, already public figures with their own loyal followings, now found themselves at the center of a media frenzy, each struggling to define the narrative. For Senator Kennedy, the battle was both personal and professional. Despite the mounting pressure, his calm, measured approach remained unchanged. His legal team worked tirelessly, sifting through documents, drafting motions, and preparing for the next stage of the trial. Kennedy's position was clear. He wasn't fighting for money, although the $80 million figure had garnered attention. He was fighting for his reputation, his integrity, and the truth. Kennedy knew that public opinion was just as important as the legal strategy in this case. Every public appearance, every speech, and every interaction with the media could shape the outcome of the case. The media scrutiny, relentless and unyielding, often seemed like an additional adversary. But Kennedy, as he had done countless times in his career, took control of the narrative, never once allowing himself to be swayed by the storm of public opinion. At a town hall in Baton Rouge, Kennedy faced an eager crowd of supporters, many of whom had long trusted him to fight for the working people of Louisiana. As he took the stage, the room fell silent, hanging on to every word. "This lawsuit isn't just about me," Kennedy began, his voice firm and resolute. "It's about ensuring that the truth is never silenced by reckless, baseless accusations. I will not let anyone tear down my reputation with lies. I stand before you because I believe in accountability. We deserve more than empty rhetoric. We deserve honesty." The crowd erupted into applause, the support overwhelming. Clips from the town hall soon flooded social media, spreading like wildfire. "Kennedy fights back," the hashtags read. The message was clear. Kennedy wasn't just defending himself, he was defending the principles that had guided his career for decades. The response to his speech was overwhelmingly positive, particularly among conservatives who had long viewed Kennedy as a reliable voice of reason in a politically polarized world. But for Adam Schiff, the walls were closing in. Despite his initial defiance, the cracks in his defense began to widen. As the media pounced on the leaked email which had revealed that Schiff's team had discussed finding any dirt, accurate or not, on Kennedy, the narrative around the case began to shift. Legal experts weighed in, analyzing the phrase "accurate or not," and many agreed that it could potentially serve as the smoking gun that would prove actual malice, the standard needed to win a defamation case against a public figure. Schiff, who had once been a rising star in the Democratic Party, now found himself in a precarious position. The initial waves of support from his progressive base began to fade, replaced by mounting doubts. Some of his closest allies started to distance themselves, quietly acknowledging the risks of making unsubstantiated accusations. Media outlets, once quick to defend Schiff's rhetoric, now began to ask harder questions. Was it responsible to accuse a fellow public servant without evidence? Asked one major news outlet. Another headline read, "Schiff's defamation lawsuit, the legal and moral fallout." Schiff, ever the strategist, tried to regain control. In a hastily arranged press conference, he doubled down on his accusations. "This lawsuit is nothing more than an attempt to intimidate those of us who dare to speak out against the corporate interests that control Washington," he declared, his voice firm but tinged with a hint of desperation. "I won't be silenced, and I won't back down." But even as he spoke, the words seemed hollow. The damage was already done. The public began to question the legitimacy of his claims, and his once steadfast supporters started to waver. Behind closed doors, Schiff's team was in turmoil. Advisors huddled together, debating how best to respond to the mounting evidence against them. The leaked email, which had already caused significant damage, was just the beginning. Internal communications continued to surface, showing that Schiff's team had been discussing tactics to smear Kennedy's reputation long before. The Instagram livestream, the strategy to attack Kennedy's integrity, regardless of the truth, had been laid out in plain black and white, and it was clear that Schiff's team had knowingly misled the public. As the legal team worked to piece together the case, Kennedy's lawyers grew more confident. The evidence, once a set of disparate pieces, was now forming a cohesive narrative. The emails, the internal communications, and Schiff's own words all pointed to one inescapable conclusion. Schiff had knowingly spread false accusations in an attempt to destroy Kennedy's reputation for political gain. The lawsuit was no longer just a legal matter, it had become a moral one. Kennedy's legal team filed a motion to compel Schiff's campaign to release more internal documents, suspecting that there were even more damning communications that had yet to be uncovered. In a move designed to put additional pressure on Schiff, they publicly hinted that more leaks were coming. The media, sensing blood in the water, seized on the new development, and the narrative began to tilt in Kennedy's favor. The turning point came when a former member of Schiff's staff, who had grown disillusioned with the direction of the campaign, came forward with a deposition. In it, the former staffer confirmed that Schiff had ignored repeated warnings about the risks of attacking Kennedy without proper evidence. The deposition provided further evidence that Schiff had acted recklessly, knowingly risking the harm to Kennedy's career without regard for the consequences. With each passing day, the weight of the case shifted more toward Kennedy. The public began to rally behind him in greater numbers, not just as a defender of his own reputation, but as a defender of truth and integrity in an increasingly polarized and misleading political environment. Schiff, once a champion of progressive causes, now found himself fighting not just a legal battle but a battle for his political future. The momentum had shifted, and it seemed that Kennedy was on the verge of a significant victory. But in politics, the game is never over until the final act is written. Kennedy, however, was already focused on the next step. His message remained consistent. This is not just about winning a lawsuit. This is about restoring the faith of the American people in their leaders. The war was far from over, but Kennedy was ready for whatever came next. The legal battle had become a testament to the power of truth, and Kennedy was prepared to see it through to the end. As the lawsuit between Senator Kennedy and Representative Schiff continued to unfold, the stakes became ever higher, both legally and politically. The media frenzy surrounding the case intensified, with every new development quickly becoming headline news. Kennedy's legal team was riding high on the momentum of the evidence they had uncovered, particularly the leaked emails and the damning deposition from a former Schiff staffer. Every day seemed to bring new revelations, and each one was a nail in Schiff's political coffin. Despite the mounting evidence against him, Schiff continued to publicly deny the accusations. His response was a mix of defiance and frustration, a tone that only seemed to fuel the fire of media scrutiny. Schiff, once a beloved figure in progressive politics, now found himself on the defensive, facing questions from the press that grew increasingly hostile. The public's perception of him began to shift from admiration to doubt, and the once loyal supporters who had rallied behind his anti-corporate rhetoric began to question his integrity. Kennedy, on the other hand, stood firm. Throughout the legal battle, he never wavered in his stance. His calm, composed demeanor, both in the courtroom and in public, only served to strengthen his position. While Schiff fought to salvage his credibility, Kennedy remained focused on the core of the lawsuit, exposing the truth and holding Schiff accountable for the damage done to his reputation. In Louisiana, Kennedy's popularity surged. He was now seen by many as a symbol of integrity in the face of reckless political attacks. At a rally in Baton Rouge, the crowd roared as Kennedy took the stage. He spoke passionately, but with restraint, never allowing the rhetoric to overshadow the message. "This isn't just about me," Kennedy said, his voice steady and resolute. "This is about the truth. And the truth matters. When you stand up to the lies, when you fight for what's right, you make sure that the truth will always prevail." The crowd cheered, the applause reverberating in the hall. Kennedy had become more than just a politician in that moment. He was a beacon of hope for those who felt disenfranchised by the political system, for those who believed that power could be wielded with honor, not deception. His approval ratings soared as his supporters rallied behind him. He was no longer just defending himself, he was defending the very principles that underpinned the democratic system. Meanwhile, Schiff's camp was in chaos. His legal team, once confident in their ability to dismiss the lawsuit, now found themselves scrambling to contain the damage. Internal memos leaked to the press painted a picture of a team divided, some urging Schiff to apologize and move on, while others pushed for a more aggressive stance. Schiff's unwillingness to admit fault or apologize for his reckless statements only made things worse. The public backlash against him grew louder, especially as new revelations about his campaign's tactics continued to emerge. The leaked emails had already shown that Schiff's team had sought to smear Kennedy by any means necessary, regardless of the truth. But it wasn't just the emails that were damning. It was the growing perception that Schiff had used his platform to intentionally harm a political opponent without any real evidence. The damage to his credibility was irreversible. The media, once quick to champion Schiff's efforts to challenge corporate influence, now began to shift their narrative. Even progressives, who had long supported Schiff's fight for justice, began to distance themselves. Prominent figures in the Democratic Party, once allies, started to voice concerns. "This wasn't what we signed up for," one anonymous Democratic strategist told a political outlet. "We believed in Adams' message, but this was a step too far." The rift within Schiff's own party was becoming clear, and with it his political future seemed increasingly uncertain. The public debate raged on. Television talk shows, news panels, and social media became battlegrounds, with each side presenting their case to the public. Progressive media outlets tried, to spin the narrative in Schiff's favor, framing him as a martyr in the fight against corporate greed. But conservative pundits seized on the opportunity to attack Schiff's credibility, calling him a liar and accusing him of using the truth as a weapon to destroy his opponents. Kennedy, despite being at the center of a legal battle, managed to remain above the fray. His message was simple yet powerful. "I'm not here to destroy anyone. I'm here to defend the truth. I'm here to make sure that no one can use their platform to harm others without consequences." His steady, unwavering approach resonated with people across the political spectrum, earning him respect even from those who might not have agreed with his policies. The lawsuit, once seen as a simple legal battle, had transformed into something much larger. A referendum on the role of truth in politics and the accountability of public figures. Kennedy had turned the tables, making the fight about integrity and personal responsibility. As the case progressed, the media began to frame it as a defining moment in the political landscape, one that would shape how politicians and public figures would be held accountable for their words and actions in the digital age. For Schiff, however, the fallout was growing. The once unstoppable force of his public persona had been shattered, and with it, his political clout. The pressure on him was mounting from all sides. Legal costs soared and rumors of potential settlements began to circulate. The financial toll of the lawsuit was beginning to take its toll on Schiff's campaign, and he was forced to make difficult decisions about how to proceed. Despite the pressure, Schiff refused to apologize. His pride, once his greatest strength, had now become his greatest weakness. "I won't back down," he said in a defiant statement to the press. "I will continue to fight for what's right, even if I have to do it alone." But even as he spoke, the cracks in his armor were becoming impossible to ignore. In the weeks that followed, the media continued to focus on the case, each new revelation further damaging Schiff's reputation. Kennedy's legal team had already filed new motions, pushing for the release of more documents and demanding full transparency from Schiff's campaign. Every new development in the case only pushed Schiff further into a corner, while Kennedy, ever calm and collected, continued to rise in stature. As the case reached its climax, the political world was watching. The truth was no longer just a matter for the courtroom. It had become a battleground for the soul of American politics. Kennedy's steadfast defense of integrity had earned him the moral high ground, and now it seemed inevitable that the tide would turn in his favor. But for Schiff, the fight was far from over. His credibility was in tatters, his supporters growing, more uncertain by the day. The road ahead seemed only to lead to one conclusion: a political career in freefall, with no clear way out. The battle between Senator Kennedy and Representative Schiff had reached a fever pitch. What had begun as a legal dispute over a few inflammatory words on a live stream had morphed into a national spectacle, an all-consuming fight that threatened to tear apart both men's careers. As the days went by, the pressure on Schiff only increased, while Kennedy's resolve remained unshaken. The court of public opinion had begun to deliver its verdict, and the scales were tipping decisively in Kennedy's favor. The revelation of the leaked emails had proven to be a turning point, a moment when Schiff's carefully constructed narrative began to unravel. The emails, which outlined a strategy to dig up dirt on Kennedy, regardless of whether it was true, were devastating. The phrase "accurate or not" echoed in the minds of journalists and political analysts across the country. It was clear that Schiff had crossed a line. His accusations against Kennedy were not based on fact, but on a calculated attempt to undermine his opponent for political gain. In the days that followed, the media frenzy only grew more intense. Cable news programs ran hour-long segments dedicated to dissecting the legal battle, with pundits and analysts offering their take on the situation. Progressive media outlets tried to salvage Schiff's reputation, portraying him as a hero standing up against corporate influence in politics. But the overwhelming sentiment among many viewers was one of skepticism. Schiff's credibility was tarnished beyond repair. At a press conference, Schiff stood before the cameras, his face taut with frustration. He had once been a rising star in the Democratic Party, known for his leadership on key issues like impeachment and environmental reform. But now, the man who had made his name by challenging the powerful was struggling to defend himself against a lawsuit that accused him of spreading falsehoods for political gain. "I won't apologize for speaking the truth," Schiff said, his voice tense. "What I said about Senator Kennedy is true. He's in the pocket of big oil, blocking the reforms we need to combat climate change." His words seemed desperate, clinging to the narrative he had built, but they lacked the conviction they once had. The press, once sympathetic to his cause, now pressed him relentlessly. "Do you have evidence to back up your claims?" one reporter asked. Schiff hesitated, his eyes darting around the room. He had no solid proof to offer. The once unshakable confidence that had fueled his political rise was now visibly crumbling. Kennedy, meanwhile, was capitalizing on the momentum. His legal team had filed a series of motions pushing for more evidence to be made public and for Schiff to be held accountable for the harm he had caused. The leaked emails, coupled with the deposition from Schiff's own staffer, painted a damning picture of intentional malice and deceit. Kennedy's legal team was working at full speed, and they were confident that the court would soon rule in their favor. But Kennedy wasn't just focused on winning the case. He was also keenly aware of the broader implications of the fight. The truth for him was paramount, and the stakes had grown beyond his own reputation. He wanted to make a statement, not just for himself, but for the American people. He was standing up for the idea that public figures should be held accountable for their words, especially when those words had the power to ruin lives. Kennedy continued to speak out in the media, but unlike Schiff, his words were measured, calm and grounded, in fact. At a rally in New Orleans, he addressed his supporters with his characteristic poise. "This fight is about more than just one man's reputation. It's about the principles that this country was built on: truth, accountability, and the responsibility of those in power to lead with integrity," Kennedy said, his voice steady, but powerful. His supporters erupted in applause, and the sentiment on social media echoed that support. Kennedy was not just the man suing Schiff for defamation. He was the embodiment of the truth, and his campaign was gaining steam. Political pundits were now talking about him in a new light, not just as a seasoned senator, but as a figure of moral authority who had taken a stand in a time when truth seemed to be an afterthought in politics. As the media shifted its focus from Schiff's defense to Kennedy's calm, strategic handling of the situation, it became apparent that the scales were tipping further in Kennedy's favor. The lawsuit was no longer just about proving that Schiff had lied. It had become a referendum on the integrity of politicians in the modern age, where social media, live streaming, and unchecked accusations could have far-reaching consequences. Behind the scenes, Schiff's legal team was in disarray. The once confident group of attorneys had now become defensive, scrambling to figure out a way to salvage their client's reputation. The leaked emails, combined with the former staffer's deposition, were proving to be insurmountable obstacles. The pressure from the media, the mounting legal fees, and the increasing alienation from his own party were beginning to take a toll on Schiff. His support, once fervent and unwavering, was now fraying. In private, Schiff's advisors had begun to suggest a settlement, but Schiff, ever stubborn, refused. "Apologizing would be seen as admitting defeat," he said, his voice cold and resolute. "I can't do that. I won't do that." His refusal to concede, to acknowledge the harm he had caused, only deepened his isolation. The internal fractures within his team were becoming more apparent, and it seemed that the longer he fought, the more he risked losing everything: his political future, his reputation, and his credibility. For Kennedy, however, the momentum was undeniable. He had proven that integrity and patience in the face of reckless attacks could turn the tide. The battle was far from over, but as he stood at the podium, his message was clear. We fight not just for ourselves, but for the truth that binds us all together. The crowd cheered, and the echoes of their support reverberated far beyond that room, into the media, into the courts, and into the heart of the American political system. As the case moved closer to its final stage, one thing was certain: Senator Kennedy's fight was not just a personal victory, but a testament to the power of truth in a world that so often seemed to ignore it. As the legal battle between Senator Kennedy and Representative Schiff drew closer to its final stages, both men found themselves on the precipice of what could be a defining moment in their careers. The fight had shifted from a simple defamation lawsuit to a larger moral and political struggle. Kennedy, whose composure and legal strategy had earned him the support of not just his base but many political observers, was now on the verge of winning not just the case but an enduring victory for integrity in politics. In contrast, Schiff, once hailed as a leader of progressive causes, was increasingly isolated. The damning evidence from his own campaign, the leaked emails, and the deposition from his staffer had left him with little room to maneuver. His refusal to acknowledge his mistakes had caused cracks in his party, and his once unquestionable support was crumbling. He had underestimated the consequences of his reckless accusations. Behind closed doors, Schiff's legal team was urging him to settle. "We need to cut our losses," one of his top advisors suggested during a tense strategy meeting. "The longer this drags on, the worse it's going to get. The media is turning on you, and your support base is eroding. If we don't settle soon, this will destroy you." But Schiff, who had always prided himself on his unshakable determination, refused. "I won't back down," he said firmly. "This is about principle. I can't let Kennedy walk away with a victory based on lies." Schiff's team, already on edge, knew the inevitable was approaching. In a final effort to salvage his reputation, Schiff agreed to hold one more live-streamed press conference, this time from his district office in California. The stakes were higher than ever. He needed to turn the tide, to rally his supporters, and to reclaim control of the narrative before the court case reached its climax. The live stream began with Schiff sitting behind his desk, flanked by his staff. His expression was tense, but he maintained an air of confidence. "This lawsuit is an attempt to silence those of us who are speaking truth to power," Schiff declared, his voice steady but laced with a hint of desperation. "I will not let anyone, especially not a corrupt politician like Senator Kennedy, intimidate me. I stand by everything I said about him and the oil industry." As Schiff spoke, the comments section exploded with mixed reactions. Supporters cheered his words, but there was a noticeable shift in tone. A growing chorus of critics began questioning his motives, demanding proof of his claims. The once vibrant online community that had rallied around Schiff was now fractured. Even his loyal followers were starting to ask uncomfortable questions. Where's the evidence? Why hasn't Schiff apologized yet? The cracks in Schiff's armor were widening, and the audience could sense it. Meanwhile, in Louisiana, Kennedy's legal team had been preparing for the final stages of the lawsuit. With the trial set to begin in just a few days, the pressure on Schiff was palpable. Kennedy's strategy had been methodical from the start. No rash moves, no inflammatory rhetoric. He had always focused on the facts, and the facts, as it turned out, were on his side. The leaked emails, the deposition, and the growing public support for his stance were all pieces of evidence that pointed toward one inescapable truth. Schiff had acted recklessly and maliciously in his accusations. At a rally in Baton Rouge, Kennedy addressed a crowd of supporters, his voice calm but resolute. "I'm not here to fight just for me," he said. "I'm fighting for every American who believes that our leaders should be held accountable. The truth is our most valuable weapon. When we allow lies and baseless attacks to go unchallenged, we lose something far greater than a lawsuit. We lose our faith in the system itself. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing across the room. Kennedy had become more than just a politician in that moment. He was a symbol of accountability, a reminder that integrity still mattered in a world where deceit and corruption were often the norm. As the days passed, Schiff's team continued to scramble, trying to find any last-ditch effort to salvage his credibility. But the more they tried, the worse it became. The leaked emails had painted a clear picture. Schiff's campaign had actively sought to smear Kennedy regardless of the truth. The phrase "accurate or not" had become a rallying cry for those who felt that political figures could no longer be trusted to tell the truth. In the courtroom, the judge's ruling came down like a thunderclap. The motion to dismiss the lawsuit was denied and the case would proceed to trial. Legal analysts were quick to note that this decision was a major blow to Schiff's defense. The judge's ruling essentially affirmed that there was enough evidence to suggest that Schiff's words were not just reckless, but malicious, and that he would have to answer for them in court. The media seized on the ruling. Kennedy scores. Major legal victory over Schiff, read one headline. The truth will prevail, another proclaimed. For Kennedy, this was more than just a legal win, it was a moral victory. His message had been clear from the start. Accountability mattered. And now the American public was beginning to see the truth. Schiff, now facing a trial that could further damage his career, was left with no choice but to reconsider his stance. In a final, desperate attempt to save face, he offered a public apology, but it was too little, too late. The damage had already been done. His political future was in jeopardy, and the public had already moved on. For Kennedy, however, the battle was far from over. The lawsuit had shifted the political landscape, and the ramifications of his victory would be felt for years to come. But for now, he stood as a man who had defended the truth and won. His career was intact, his reputation restored, and his belief in integrity reaffirmed. The fight had been long, but Kennedy knew that this was only the beginning. There were bigger battles ahead, and he was ready to face them. In the end, Kennedy's victory wasn't just about winning a lawsuit, it was about proving that in the face of political deceit, the truth could still prevail. The stage was set for the final chapter of this saga, but for now the nation watched as the story of two men, their careers, their integrity, and their futures, played out before the world. And for Senator Kennedy it was clear, the truth was not just a weapon, it was the foundation of everything he stood for. The aftermath of the trial marked the end of a turbulent chapter in American politics, one that would forever reshape how public figures navigated the high-stakes world of social media, defamation, and political discourse. The battle between Senator Kennedy and Representative Schiff had not only exposed the dark side of political smear campaigns, but also reaffirmed the importance of truth, integrity, and accountability in the public sphere. In the days following the court's ruling, which had delivered a decisive blow to Schiff, the media landscape was flooded with reactions. Conservative outlets hailed Kennedy as a champion of truth, a defender of the people's faith in their leaders. Senator Kennedy defends integrity, wins major legal victory, read one headline, as the story of his victory spread far beyond Louisiana. For many, Kennedy's calm, calculated approach in the face of vicious attacks had transformed him from a familiar political figure into a symbol of moral fortitude. His popularity skyrocketed, and his approval ratings in Louisiana reached an all-time high. But Kennedy, ever the politician, knew that this wasn't just a personal victory. It was a broader message about the need for accountability in a world where lies could travel faster than facts. Schiff, on the other hand, was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered career. His political future, once bright and full of promise, now appeared uncertain. Despite his best efforts to spin the narrative in his favor, the evidence against him had been overwhelming. The leaked emails, the deposition from his own staffer, and the judge's decision to allow the lawsuit to proceed had painted a picture of a man who had acted recklessly, without regard for the consequences of his actions. Schiff's attempts to salvage his image only seemed to make matters worse. His public apology, made in the final hours of the trial, was seen by many as a last-ditch effort to avoid further damage, but it was far too little, too late. The progressive community, once his most vocal supporters, began to turn on him. The progressive media, which had once praised Schiff for his stance on corporate greed and environmental issues, now began to question his judgment. Schiff's fall from grace, a cautionary tale, read one headline, and the narrative surrounding him shifted dramatically. Even some of his closest allies distanced themselves, unwilling to be dragged down by his scandal. His credibility, once solid, was now in tatters, and it seemed that the political star who had once been hailed as the future of the Democratic Party had burned out faster than anyone had expected. In private, Schiff's legal team discussed the growing pressure. "It's over," one senior advisor said quietly, his face drawn with exhaustion. "The public won't buy this anymore. We've lost their trust." Schiff, standing at the window of his Capitol Hill office, stared out at the city he had once believed he could change. The weight of his actions, of his lies, pressed down on him. His reputation, his career, everything he had built, was now crumbling before his eyes. Meanwhile, in Louisiana, Kennedy was preparing for the next phase of his political journey. Though the lawsuit had brought him national attention, he knew that the fight was not over. The victory in court was just one step on a much longer path. He had not only cleared his name, but had set a precedent that would echo throughout the political world. For Kennedy, the real victory wasn't just winning the lawsuit, it was proving that truth and accountability still mattered in the cutthroat world of politics. At a press conference shortly after the trial, Kennedy stood before the cameras, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "This is not about winning a lawsuit," he said. "This is about making sure that the truth remains sacred in our democracy. It's about holding people accountable, no matter how powerful they may be. We can't afford to let lies and corruption run unchecked. We owe it to the American people to protect the integrity of our system." The media ate up his words, and once again, Kennedy's popularity soared. His approval ratings in Louisiana continued to climb, and his reputation as a principled, no-nonsense politician became cemented. But Kennedy knew the true impact of this battle wasn't just about personal gain. It was about restoring the faith of the people in their leaders. He had proven that integrity could still win in a world where dishonesty often reigned supreme. Behind the scenes, Schiff's legal team began preparing for the inevitable consequences of their client's downfall. Legal bills had piled up and, despite their best efforts to fight the case, the damage to Schiff's political standing had already been done. He had burned too many bridges, alienated too many allies, and failed to take responsibility for the lies he had told. The Democratic Party, once behind him, was now beginning to look ahead to new leaders who understood the value of truth and transparency in the digital age. In the final hours of the legal battle, Schiff made an abrupt decision to step down from his leadership role in Congress. In a brief statement, he claimed that he needed to focus on his constituents and that the lawsuit had taken a toll on him and his family. But those close to him knew the truth. His resignation was an admission of defeat. It was a retreat, a way to save face in a world where public perception could make or break a career. As Schiff faded into the background of American politics, Kennedy emerged stronger than ever. His victory in the lawsuit had been more than just a personal triumph. It had been a victory for the idea that truth and accountability still mattered in politics. Kennedy's message was clear. Lies may be powerful, but the truth has a way of prevailing. And with that, the stage was set for the next chapter in Kennedy's political career, a career now shaped not just by his past achievements, but by the courage he had shown in the face of political deceit. In the end, Kennedy had won the battle, not just for himself, but for the integrity of the democratic process. And as he looked toward the future, he knew that the fight for truth would continue. The stakes had never been higher, but with his reputation restored and his principles intact, Senator Kennedy was ready for whatever came next. As the dust settled, after the trial and public fallout, Senator Kennedy's victory became more than just a legal win. It became a defining moment in his political career, a moment that would shape the future of his leadership and echo across American politics for years to come. The public, exhausted by the barrage of political scandals and unverified claims, had found something they could rally behind: a leader who stood firm on integrity, who chose the truth over political convenience. Kennedy's approval ratings skyrocketed, not only in Louisiana but nationwide. His calm and collected demeanor throughout the entire legal battle, coupled with his unwavering commitment to transparency and accountability, had earned him the trust of a public increasingly wary of deceit and manipulation in the political sphere. Kennedy had emerged as a rare breed of politician, one who not only spoke about truth but had proven through action that he would defend it at all costs. In Washington, the ripples of the lawsuit were still being felt. Kennedy's success in the defamation case set a new precedent for how politicians handled personal attacks and defamation in the digital age. His legal team, who had fought tirelessly to expose the falsehoods and malice behind Schiff's accusations, became highly sought after by political figures, corporations, and public personalities who understood the importance of defending their reputation in the court of public opinion. Kennedy's victory, however, was more than just legal. It was a moral victory that challenged the rising tide of misinformation in politics. The political world began to take notice of the changing dynamics. Leaders from both parties, while divided on many issues, began to agree on one central point: the way that social media and digital platforms had shaped the political discourse could no longer be ignored. Falsehoods, half-truths, and unverified claims could spread faster than ever before, and the consequences of allowing them to go unchecked were dire. Kennedy's victory had demonstrated the power of accountability, and it was clear that a new standard was needed for political discourse. For Representative Schiff, the fallout from the lawsuit had reached its peak. Despite his continued efforts to downplay the significance of the case, the truth had become undeniable. His career, once on an upward trajectory, had been irreversibly altered by his reckless accusations. The public apology, issued too late, was met with mixed reactions. While some of his supporters tried to rally around him, the damage was already done. The leaked emails and the deposition from his own staff had made it clear. Schiff's accusations against Kennedy were not just politically motivated, they were malicious, intended to destroy a political opponent without regard for the truth. In the days following the final ruling, Schiff withdrew from the public eye. His once vibrant political career came to a screeching halt. The media, once focused on his every move, had now shifted its attention elsewhere. Political analysts began to reassess his legacy, and many concluded that Schiff's inability to admit his mistakes, to take responsibility for his actions, had been his downfall. His stubbornness, once seen as a sign of strength, had ultimately become his greatest weakness. As for Kennedy, his journey had only just begun. The lawsuit had cemented his position as a defender of truth in a polarized political environment, but he knew that his work wasn't over. There were still battles to be fought, still systems of corruption to be dismantled. But now Kennedy was a stronger leader, more trusted by his constituents, and more respected on the national stage. His message of integrity had resonated deeply with the American people, and he felt the weight of their trust. In the months that followed, Kennedy's political influence grew. His name was mentioned as a potential future presidential contender, though he remained focused on his work in the Senate. He knew that the fight for truth and transparency in politics was a long one, and while the lawsuit had been a major victory, it was just one chapter in a much larger story. Kennedy's real focus remained on the issues that had brought him into politics in the first place: education, healthcare, economic opportunity, and environmental justice. But beyond the policies and the speeches, the victory over Schiff became a symbol of something larger, something more profound. Kennedy's stand for truth had become a rallying cry for a nation tired of scandal, lies, and the erosion of trust in its leaders. His example showed that no matter the odds, standing firm on principle could lead to real change. For Kennedy, the final chapter of this saga wasn't about revenge or political gain. It was about restoring faith in the system, proving that integrity still mattered in an age when so many had forgotten its value. The public had watched as he defended his reputation, fought for the truth, and emerged victorious against the tide of political manipulation. As he looked out over the Capitol building from his office in Washington, Kennedy reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had faced the fiercest political attacks with his name and reputation on the line. But through it all, he had remained steadfast in his belief that the truth would prevail. And now, as he prepared for the next chapter in his career, he was more determined than ever to continue fighting, not just for his state, but for the very principles that had guided him through this tumultuous battle. In the end, Kennedy's victory wasn't just a personal one. It was a victory for all those who believed in the power of truth, integrity, and accountability. And as the country watched, it became clear that the message was resonating. In a world where lies could spread like wildfire, the truth had the power to spark change. And Senator John Kennedy, with his calm determination and unwavering commitment to the truth, had just proven it.